The body bag had been sealed for 40 minutes, but the white K-9 standing over it still refused to believe the man inside was dead. Rain pressed against the corrugated roof of the temporary recovery station outside Camp Lejeune, each drop landing with the soft, endless rhythm of fingers tapping on a locked door. The storm had moved inland before dawn, leaving the coastal highway drowned in silver water and the pine woods bent beneath a hard Atlantic wind. Inside the converted supply warehouse, portable lights cast pale circles across the concrete floor. Wet boots squeaked. Radios murmured. A diesel generator trembled somewhere beyond the rear wall, filling the air with the smell of fuel, damp canvas, and cold metal. Gunnery Sergeant Mason Cole had seen difficult mornings before. He had learned to recognize grief by the way people carried their shoulders, by the silence that followed a name, by the careful movements of those afraid one sudden sound might break whatever strength they had left. But he had never seen grief look like this. The German shepherd stood with all four paws planted beside a black body bag near the far loading doors. His coat was almost entirely white, not cream or pale gold, but the color of fresh snow beneath moonlight. Rainwater dripped from the long fur under his chest. Mud darkened his paws. A faint scar crossed the bridge of his nose, and the tip of his left ear folded slightly forward, as though some old injury had taught it humility. He wore no leash. No handler stood nearby. No identification tag hung from his collar. Yet he carried himself like a working dog awaiting orders that had not come. 2 Marines had tried to coax him away with water and a blanket. He had ignored both. A third had offered food. The dog had not even turned his head. His amber eyes remained fixed on the bag. Not frightened. Not confused. Certain. Petty Officer Evelyn Hart crouched several feet away, watching him with the patience of someone who had spent years near wounded animals and guarded men. She kept her hands open where he could see them. "He hasn't barked once," she said quietly. Mason looked toward the recovery tag fastened near the zipper. The ink had bled in the rain, but one line remained readable. Unknown male. Sector 17. Time confirmed. For 12 a.m., maybe he followed the team in, one of the younger Marines said. Maybe that was his owner. Mason studied the dog. Then why won't he lie down? No one answered. The shepherd was tired. That much was clear. His sides rose and fell beneath the soaked fur, and one rear leg trembled whenever he shifted his weight. But he did not collapse. He did not pace. He stood guard as if fatigue were a rule he had chosen not to obey. Mason stepped closer. The dog's ears moved toward him, but his gaze never left the bag. "Easy boy," Mason said. His voice was low, steady, shaped by years of giving commands without wasting them. "We're not here to take anything from you." The dog finally looked at him. For one brief second, Mason felt something pass between them. Not trust. Not yet. More like a question. Then the shepherd lifted his right paw and placed it gently on the center of the body bag. He pressed once. Waited. Pressed again. Then a third time. The sound was soft against the heavy plastic. Tap. 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 Evelyn's expression changed. "Did you see that?" Mason nodded. "He's done it before," the young Marine said. "Every time someone gets close." Mason moved another step forward. The shepherd did not growl. Instead, he shifted his body, placing himself between Mason and the zipper while keeping one paw on the bag. It was not a threat. It was a plea made with discipline, a request without panic. Mason had seen military dogs alert to hidden wires, unfamiliar scents, and sounds too distant for human ears. He had watched them freeze in doorways when every instrument said the path ahead was clear. Good handlers learned not to dismiss certainty simply because it arrived on 4 paws. "Let's move him gently," Mason said. "No force." Evelyn reached for a slip lead. Before she could take a step, the body bag moved. It was barely more than a ripple beneath the black surface, a small rise near the shoulder, then nothing. The room went still. The generator continued its low mechanical hum. Rain ticked against the roof. Somewhere near the entrance, a radio whispered and was quickly silenced. Mason stared at the bag. No one spoke. The shepherd lowered his head until his nose hovered an inch above the zipper. His whole body became motionless, listening, waiting, believing. Mason felt the air change around them, the way a church feels after the final note of a hymn has faded, but before anyone is ready to leave. "Wind trapped underneath," someone whispered, though there was no wind inside the warehouse. Evelyn did not look away from the bag. Maybe, she said. Then the shepherd placed his paw against it once more, and from beneath the sealed plastic came a sound so faint Mason could not tell whether it was breath, memory, or hope refusing to be buried. Mason raised one hand, and every person in the warehouse understood the command without hearing it. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the radio near the entrance seemed too loud, so Lance Corporal Daniel Reed reached over and turned its volume all the way down. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with rain, machinery, and the quiet breathing of people afraid to hope too quickly. Evelyn Hart lowered herself beside the black bag, careful not to cross the invisible boundary the white shepherd had drawn around it. The dog watched her hands. His amber eyes followed every inch of movement, steady and alert. "I am only going to listen," she said softly. "That is all." She placed 2 fingers against the side of the bag near the man's neck, though the thick material made the gesture nearly useless. Then she leaned closer, bringing her ear within inches of the sealed zipper. For several seconds, there was nothing. No voice. No movement. No clear breath. Only the low vibration of the generator passing through the concrete floor. Evelyn sat back. The hope on Daniel's face dimmed. "Could have been trapped air," one Marine murmured. Mason looked at the white dog. The shepherd had not relaxed. His head remained lowered, his body angled toward the center of the bag, as if he were listening to a clock no human ear could hear. Evelyn reached toward the paper seal attached to the zipper. It bore the signature of the recovery medic who had confirmed the death before the body was transported from Sector 17. Breaking it without cause would create questions, reports, and an investigation. Mason had never feared paperwork, but he respected the rules behind it. Rules protected people when exhaustion and emotion blurred judgment. Yet rules were written by human beings, and human beings sometimes stopped listening too soon. "Run the identification again," he said. Daniel lifted the damp tag and read the faded information aloud. "Unknown adult male. Found near the south evacuation route at 3:47 in the morning. No identification on arrival. No detectable pulse. No response to verbal commands. Medical confirmation?" Evelyn asked. Daniel turned the tag over. "For 12 in the morning." Evelyn checked the clock above the supply cage. Nearly 45 minutes had passed. She looked toward Mason. If he was exposed to cold water, a pulse could have been difficult to detect. "But not for this long," another Marine said. Evelyn did not answer. Her eyes went to the shepherd. The dog slowly lifted his right paw. He placed it on the bag. Once. He waited. Twice. He waited again. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel's face changed so suddenly that Mason noticed. "What is it?" Mason asked. Daniel stepped closer but kept a respectful distance from the dog. "I have seen that signal." "Where?" "At a joint training exercise in Virginia last year. Search dogs working collapsed structures. Some handlers taught a silent alert for a living person who could not respond. The dog would touch the location 3 times instead of barking, especially when noise could interfere with rescue teams." Mason studied him. "Are you certain?" "I am certain about the signal. I am not certain this dog was trained to use it." The shepherd looked at Daniel as though he understood every word. Then he struck the same spot 3 times again. Not harder, not faster, exactly the same rhythm. Evelyn took a slow breath. "That is not grief." Mason's eyes remained on the dog. "No, that is communication," she said. The young Marine near the entrance shifted uneasily. "The tag says the man was confirmed dead." Mason glanced at the seal. A narrow strip of white paper. A small thing, yet it carried the full weight of an official conclusion. Beyond the loading doors, wind pushed rain beneath the metal frame, sending a thin stream across the floor. It crept toward the body bag and stopped just short of the shepherd's paws. The dog did not notice. His entire world had narrowed to what lay beneath him. Mason stepped forward until he was close enough to see the slight tremor running through the animal's wet shoulders. The shepherd was cold, exhausted, perhaps injured somewhere beneath the mud. Still, he had chosen to spend whatever strength remained on 3 careful taps. "Bring the portable monitor," Mason said. Evelyn looked toward the medical TA. Evelyn did not move at first. She kept one hand raised, asking the room to remain silent, while the other rested near the small monitor pressed against the heavy plastic. The screen still showed no reliable rhythm, only a faint line trembling beneath the rain. Then the breath came again. Thin, uneven, human. Mason felt every person in the warehouse lean toward the sound without taking a single step. The white shepherd lowered his head until his nose touched the zipper. His wet fur brushed the black surface, and a quiet vibration moved through his chest, not a growl, but something closer to recognition. Evelyn shifted the sensor half an inch toward the center of the bag. The line flickered, once, then disappeared. "I need the medical kit," she said. Daniel Reed brought it immediately and placed it beside her. No one spoke above a whisper now. The darkness had changed the room. With the overhead lights gone, the warehouse no longer felt like a military recovery station. It felt like a place between conclusions, where one small sound could return a life to the world or vanish before anyone reached it. Mason crouched beside Evelyn. "Can you confirm anything?" She shook her head. "Not through this material. The cold may be masking everything. The seal has to come off." Mason looked at the narrow paper strip across the zipper. It had been signed, timed, and stamped. A final answer reduced to ink. He reached for it. The shepherd rose at once. His body moved between Mason and the bag, but he did not show his teeth. He simply stood there, white coat shining in the flashlight beams, amber eyes fixed on Mason with an intensity that felt almost human. Mason stopped. "You brought us this far," he said softly. "Let us help him now." The dog watched him for another second. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. He did not go far. He remained close enough that one paw still touched the bag. Mason broke the paper seal. The sound was small, no louder than dry leaves tearing in autumn, yet it seemed to pass through the entire room. Evelyn found the metal pull at the top of the zipper. Before she opened it, the shape inside moved again. This time there was no mistaking it. A slight turn beneath the plastic. A shoulder trying to rise. A hand shifting somewhere near the chest. Daniel covered his mouth. The young Marine by the door whispered a prayer so quietly that only the rain could have heard it. Evelyn bent close. "Sir, can you hear me? You are safe. We are going to open the bag." For several seconds, nothing answered. Then a sound formed beneath the sealed cover. It was too weak to be called a word at first. Air moved through a dry throat. A broken syllable followed. The shepherd became perfectly still. His folded left ear lifted. Evelyn leaned closer. "Say it again." The voice came once more, faint as breath crossing a window. "Ghost." The dog reacted before anyone else understood. His paws slid forward across the damp concrete. His nose pressed against the zipper, and a soft cry escaped him, so restrained and aching that Mason felt it in his chest. The name had not been a random sound. It had been meant for him. "His name is Ghost," Daniel whispered. The shepherd tapped the bag once, then twice, then a third time, but the rhythm had changed. It was faster now, urgent. Evelyn opened the zipper. Cold air slipped from inside, carrying the scent of rainwater, wet fabric, and earth. She pulled the opening wide enough to reach the man's face and neck. His skin was cold, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow enough to disappear between seconds. Mud marked his dark brown skin near the jaw. His hair was cut close, and a thin scar traced the left side of his temple. Evelyn placed 2 fingers against his neck and waited. Her expression tightened. Then she found it. "There is a pulse," she said. "Weak, but present." The warehouse came alive. Medical bags opened. Flashlights shifted. A warming blanket was spread across the floor. Mason gave instructions in a calm voice, keeping everyone focused while Evelyn worked. Ghost did not interfere. He stayed beside the man's shoulder, watching every movement, his body trembling from cold and something deeper than cold. As Evelyn carefully freed one of the man's hands, his fingers remained closed around a small piece of metal. She tried to loosen them, but even unconscious, he held on. Mason knelt beside her and helped gently unfold the hand. Resting in the center of the man's palm was half of a worn military dog tag. The edge had been broken years ago, leaving only part of the engraving visible beneath the grime. Daniel wiped it with his sleeve. One word appeared in the beam of his flashlight. "Ghost." The shepherd lowered his muzzle to the man's hand. His eyes closed for a single second. Outside, the storm continued over North Carolina. But inside the dark warehouse, the Marines understood that the dog had not been guarding a stranger. He had been waiting beside someone who had remembered his name even when breath was almost gone. The warming blanket rose, and fell so faintly that Evelyn had to keep one hand near the man's chest to make certain each breath was real. Mason called for immediate transport, and within minutes, the warehouse doors rolled open to a gray morning washed in rain. A military ambulance waited outside with its rear lights glowing through the mist. The cold wind moved across the concrete, lifting the white fur along Ghost's shoulders, but the dog did not look away from the stretcher. When the medical team raised the man from the floor, Ghost walked beside them with one paw favoring the wet ground. No leash guided him. No command was needed. He matched every turn of the wheels as if an invisible line still connected his heartbeat to the weakened pulse beneath the blanket. Evelyn climbed into the ambulance and checked the man's airway while Daniel handed her the equipment she requested. Mason remained at the doors, watching Ghost prepare to follow. "He cannot ride loose," the driver said. Ghost placed his front paws on the rear step. His amber eyes moved from the driver to Evelyn, then back to the man on the stretcher. Evelyn reached for a spare restraint strap and secured it gently to the dog's collar. "He is part of the rescue," she said. The driver gave a small nod. The doors closed, shutting out the rain. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, damp wool, and warm plastic. Ghost settled on the narrow floor beside the stretcher, his body pressed close enough that the man's hanging fingertips brushed the fur along his neck whenever the ambulance turned. Evelyn placed warming pads around the man's torso and began checking his clothing for identification. His jacket carried no wallet. His pockets held only a waterlogged compass, 2 folded photographs too damaged to read, and a military identification card sealed inside a small plastic sleeve. She wiped the surface with gauze and held it beneath the overhead light. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks, United States Marine Corps, age 37. Mason, riding in the front passenger seat, heard the name through the open divider. "Run it through personnel records," he told Daniel over the radio. Daniel repeated the name clearly, letter by letter, then waded through the hiss of static. Ghost lifted his head at the sound of Isaiah's name. His folded ear moved forward. Evelyn noticed. "You know him," she whispered. The dog placed his muzzle against the edge of the stretcher. Isaiah's eyelids did not open, but his fingers shifted through the white fur as though memory had reached the surface before consciousness. The ambulance moved north toward the base medical center, tires sending water across the flooded road. Pine trees passed behind rain-streaked windows. Sirens remained off. There was no need to announce urgency to empty streets. Inside, urgency lived in every number on the monitor. Isaiah's temperature was dangerously low. His pulse appeared, vanished, then returned. Evelyn spoke to him in a steady voice, telling him where he was and that he was not alone. Ghost listened as if the words were also meant for him. At the medical center, a team met them beneath the covered entrance. The rain had softened to a cold drizzle, and daylight was beginning to spread across the low clouds. The stretcher rolled through automatic doors into bright warmth. Ghost followed until a nurse stepped between him and the treatment room. "Animals cannot enter beyond this point," she said. Ghost stopped. He did not pull against the strap. He simply stared through the narrowing doorway as Isaiah disappeared beneath white lights. Evelyn looked at the dog, then at the half-tag still resting in a sealed evidence pouch. "Keep him here," she told Mason. "Isaiah may need something familiar when he wakes." Mason led Ghost to a quiet corner of the hallway. A technician brought towels, water, and a padded mat. The dog ignored the mat, but allowed Mason to dry the rain from his coat. Beneath the mud, several faded markings showed where an old service harness had once rested. Mason found a small metal plate hidden under the collar. Most of the numbers had been worn smooth, but a partial identification code remained. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who had discovered an answer that created more questions. "Isaiah Brooks is active duty," he said. "He was assigned to storm evacuation support yesterday evening. His vehicle was found near Sector 17 after the road washed out. The team believed he had already been transferred to another station." Mason looked toward the treatment room. "And the dog?" Daniel lowered his voice. "There is no current K9 listed under Brooks. But 3 years ago, he served with a white German shepherd named Ghost." Mason glanced down. The dog was no longer watching the treatment room. Every muscle in his body had tightened. At the far end of the hallway stood a tall officer in a dark service uniform, motionless beneath the fluorescent lights. His silver hair was cut close, and a folder rested under one arm. The instant Ghost saw him, a low warning formed deep in his chest. The officer stopped walking. His face lost its color. Then he looked at the worn tag in Mason's hand and whispered, "That dog was declared dead 3 years ago." The officer did not step closer. He remained beneath the pale hallway lights, one hand resting against the folder as if it contained something heavier than paper. Ghost stood beside Mason with his head lowered and his eyes fixed forward. The warning in his chest faded, but the tension did not. It was not the reaction of an animal meeting a stranger. It was recognition without welcome. "Major Aaron Whitaker," the officer said at last. His voice carried the careful calm of a man entering a room where one wrong word could reopen an old wound. "I supervise the working dog records for Isaiah Brooks's unit." Mason looked down at the worn identification plate beneath Ghost's collar. "Then explain how a living dog was declared dead." Whitaker glanced toward the treatment room before answering. Through the narrow window, medical staff moved around Isaiah beneath soft white light. The monitor beside him showed a fragile but steady rhythm. Evelyn stood near the bed, replacing a warming pad and speaking to him even though his eyes remained closed. Whitaker opened the folder. Inside were printed reports, faded photographs, and pages marked with dates from 3 years earlier. "There was a warehouse collapse during an overseas recovery mission," he said. "Brooks was evacuated unconscious. Ghost disappeared inside the damaged section of the site. The first search team found no trace of him before conditions forced them to leave." Ghost's ears shifted at the sound of Isaiah's last name. Whitaker noticed and lowered his voice. 2 days later, another unit found a white German shepherd several miles from the site. He was dehydrated, exhausted, and wearing a damaged collar. His microchip could not be read. 2 characters on the identification plate were missing. Daniel stepped beside Mason. "But someone should have matched the description." "They tried," Whitaker said. The recovery report listed the dog as pale cream, not white. The partial identification number was entered under the wrong unit code. By the time the correction reached our office, Brooks had been transferred to a rehabilitation center in the United States. Mason's expression hardened. "And nobody called him?" Whitaker closed his eyes for a moment. He had already been told Ghost did not survive. The dog was sent to a medical training facility under temporary identification. Then he was transferred again. The correction was attached to an inactive case file instead of Brooks's current personnel record. The hallway seemed colder despite the heat flowing from the vents. There had been no cruel decision. No single person had chosen to separate them. It had happened through tired hands, damaged equipment, delayed reports, and one small error copied from page to page until it became official truth. Sometimes loss entered life with thunder. Sometimes it arrived through a number typed incorrectly in a quiet office. Ghost stepped forward. Mason held the loose restraint strap, but did not pull it tight. The dog approached Whitaker slowly, stopping several feet away. Whitaker lowered himself to one knee. His formal uniform creased against the polished floor. "I saw you once after they brought you home," he said. "You were behind glass in a recovery kennel. I thought you belonged to another handler." Ghost stared at him. "I signed the final report," Whitaker continued. "I closed the file." The shepherd moved closer and smelled the officer's sleeve. For a long moment, no one breathed loudly enough to disturb him. Then Ghost turned away. There was no forgiveness in the gesture, but there was no anger either. Only the quiet judgment of a creature who had spent 3 years waiting while human certainty failed him. Whitaker rose slowly. "Brooks searched for months after his recovery," he said. "He contacted every unit connected to the mission. When no record appeared, he began carrying half of Ghost's tag. The other half had been attached to the dog's original harness." Daniel looked at the sealed pouch in Mason's hand. The piece Isaiah was holding. Whitaker nodded. He never stopped keeping it close. Behind the treatment room door, a monitor sounded once, then returned to its measured rhythm. Ghost immediately turned toward the sound. His entire body softened when Evelyn appeared at the window and gave Mason a small nod. Isaiah was still holding on. Whitaker opened another page in the folder. "There is something else." The canine retirement facility reported Ghost missing shortly after midnight. Their security cameras show that he left his enclosure moments after a storm evacuation vehicle passed the property. Mason studied the map printed beneath the report. "How far is the facility from Sector 17? Whitaker pointed to the marked route. Roads curved through flooded pine country, across 2 service bridges, and along the southern edge of the base. By the shortest route, 17.8 miles. Daniel stared at Ghost's mud-darkened paws. He followed the ambulance? Not the ambulance that brought Isaiah here, Whitaker said. An earlier recovery truck carried him past the facility before anyone believed he was alive. Mason looked through the treatment room window at the man beneath the blankets, then down at the white dog who had crossed nearly 18 miles through a storm. Ghost had not seen Isaiah. He had not heard his voice. He had been separated from him for 3 years. Yet somewhere beneath rain, diesel fumes, and wet asphalt, he had found one familiar trace in the passing air and followed it all the way to a sealed bag that the rest of the world had already stopped questioning. By mid-morning, the storm had weakened into a steady mist, but the roads south of the medical center were still covered with shallow water and broken pine branches. Major Whitaker arranged for the security recordings to be sent from the retirement facility, and Mason, Daniel, and Evelyn watched them on a tablet in the quiet family room beside Isaiah's treatment wing. Ghost lay near the door with his head resting on his paws, though his eyes remained open. The first recording showed the facility at 12:17 in the morning. Rain moved sideways beneath the parking lot lights. Inside a sheltered kennel run, Ghost had been asleep on a raised cot. Then a recovery truck appeared beyond the chain fence, moving slowly through the flooded service road. It passed the facility without stopping. Ghost lifted his head before the vehicle entered view. His nose turned toward the narrow gap beneath the kennel gate. He stood. For several seconds, he did nothing but breathe. Then his entire posture changed. His tail lowered. His ears rose. He pressed his muzzle against the wet concrete and followed a scent along the edge of the enclosure until the truck disappeared into the storm. He knew, Daniel said. Whitaker paused the recording. The truck had picked up Isaiah less than 20 minutes earlier. Evelyn looked toward Ghost. After 3 years, through rain and diesel exhaust, he still knew. The next camera showed Ghost testing the gate with his nose, then stepping back. He did not panic. He did not throw himself against the fence. He studied the latch with the same quiet patience he had shown beside the sealed bag. A maintenance worker had failed to secure the lower hook after the evening feeding. Ghost found the weakness, pushed the gate open, and slipped into the rain. Another camera captured him crossing the empty parking lot. His white coat vanished and reappeared beneath the lights like a small piece of winter moving through the dark. After that, there were only scattered images. A gas station camera recorded him 2 miles away, running along the shoulder of a county road. At 1:28, a traffic camera showed him waiting beside a flooded intersection while a line of emergency vehicles passed. He did not follow the first truck or the second. He raised his nose each time, searching. When the vehicle carrying Isaiah crossed the intersection, Ghost turned immediately and ran after it. He followed for another 4 miles before the truck entered a restricted road behind the evacuation zone. Ghost continued through a stand of pine trees and reappeared near a service bridge 40 minutes later. His pace had slowed. Mud covered his legs. Still, he never turned back. 17.8 miles, Mason said quietly, with 2 flooded roads between them. Whitaker closed the tablet. The facility staff searched the property all night. They thought thunder frightened him. Evelyn looked down at the dog. He was not running away from anything. Ghost raised his head at the sound of her voice. He was going home, she said. Near noon, a nurse entered and told them Isaiah's temperature had returned to a safer level. His breathing had strengthened, and the medical team had reduced the medication keeping him asleep. Evelyn carried the sealed pouch containing the broken tag. Mason took Ghost's lead, though the dog walked without pulling as they approached the room. The air inside was warm and quiet. Sunlight had begun to filter through the clouds, leaving a pale rectangle across the floor. Isaiah lay beneath clean blankets, his face no longer hidden by mud and rain. Without the darkness of the warehouse around him, he looked younger than 37, though weariness rested deeply around his eyes. Ghost stopped 6 feet from the bed. His chest rose once in a long breath. Evelyn moved beside Isaiah and spoke his name. His eyelids fluttered. The monitor continued its calm rhythm. Staff Sergeant Brooks, you are at the base medical center. You are safe. Isaiah opened his eyes slowly. Confusion passed across his face as he searched the room. He looked at Evelyn, then Mason, then the doorway. When his gaze reached Ghost, everything seemed to pause. The dog took one careful step forward. His tail moved once. Isaiah stared at him without speaking. Ghost lowered his head, waiting for the voice he had crossed the storm to find. Evelyn placed the pouch on the blanket. He found you at the recovery station, she said. He would not leave. Isaiah looked at the half-tag, then back at the white shepherd. His expression did not soften. Instead, something guarded rose behind his eyes. No, he whispered. Ghost stepped closer. Isaiah turned his face toward the window. My dog died 3 years ago. The words were weak, but final. Ghost stopped beside the bed, close enough to touch him, yet farther away than he had been during every mile of the storm. Ghost remained beside the bed after everyone else stepped back. He did not whine. He did not paw at Isaiah's hand. He simply lowered himself to the floor and turned his body toward the door, placing his white shoulders between the room and the hallway. The position was so deliberate that Mason noticed it immediately. Daniel noticed too. Evelyn watched Isaiah's eyes. But the Marine kept his face turned toward the pale window, where rainwater still traced slow lines down the glass. You do not have to decide anything right now, she said. Your body is still recovering. Isaiah's jaw tightened. There is nothing to decide. His voice was stronger than before, though every word seemed to cost him. Ghost was lost overseas. I read the report. I saw the signature. Major Whitaker stood near the foot of the bed with the folder held against his chest. He could have explained the error again. He could have offered dates, transfer numbers, and corrected records. Instead, he said nothing. Paper had already done enough damage. Ghost rested his chin on his front paws. His amber eyes remained on the doorway, alert but calm. Isaiah looked at him once, quickly, as if the sight caused pain. White shepherds are rare, he whispered. Not impossible. Mason pulled a chair toward the wall and sat down. That is true. Isaiah glanced at him. Then stop looking at me like I am supposed to believe in a miracle because a dog knows a name. Mason did not answer immediately. In the hallway, a cart rolled past with a soft rattle. Somewhere farther down the wing, a telephone rang once and stopped. He did more than know a name, Mason said. He found you in a storm. He would not let us move the bag. He gave a trained living person signal 3 times. Isaiah closed his eyes. Dogs remember commands. They also remember people, Evelyn said. Isaiah opened his eyes again, and for a moment anger moved through them, not toward Ghost, but toward the part of himself that wanted to hope. I buried him without a body, he said. Do you understand that? I stood in front of an empty marker and thanked a dog who was not there. I learned how to wake up without listening for his pause. I learned how to walk into a room without checking whether he cleared it first. His breathing shortened, and Evelyn reached toward the monitor, but Isaiah raised one hand. I am fine. Ghost's folded ear moved at the change in his voice. He did not turn around. He held his position near the door as though the room still needed protecting. Isaiah saw it. His expression shifted, then hardened again. It could be training. Daniel stepped closer to Mason. There may be one way to know. Isaiah looked at him. What way? Daniel hesitated. A private command. Something that would not appear in a standard training record. Whitaker opened the folder and searched through several pages. The official commands are listed here, but handlers often use informal cues in the field. Isaiah stared at the ceiling. No, the answer came too quickly. Staff Sergeant, Evelyn said gently. Nobody is asking you to perform for us. Then let him sleep, Isaiah replied. Let the dog rest. Stop trying to make him into someone he is not. Ghost lowered his head fully to the floor. The room grew quiet again. Mason signaled for the others to leave. Whitaker went first. Daniel followed, carrying the folder. Evelyn checked Isaiah's monitor and dimmed the lights before stepping into the hallway. Mason remained long enough to loosen Ghost's lead, then laid it on the floor beside him. Stay, he said softly. Ghost did not move. Isaiah looked toward Mason. You are leaving him here? He has already made that decision. Mason closed the door behind him. Afternoon faded slowly across the medical wing. The rain stopped. Clouds thinned, and weak sunlight spread across the floor until it reached Ghost's paws. Isaiah drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he woke, the shepherd was still there, facing the door. A nurse entered with water and medication. Ghost moved aside without being told, then returned to the same position after she left. Later, a tray arrived. Isaiah ate only a few bites. Ghost did not look toward the food. Night settled beyond the window. The hallway lights dimmed, leaving the room in soft blue shadow. Isaiah's breathing grew deeper. In sleep, the distance of 3 years weakened. The medical room became another place in his memory, one filled with dust, radio static, and the steady presence of a white dog close behind him. His hand shifted beneath the blanket. His lips moved before he woke. "Ghost," he murmured. The shepherd lifted his head. Isaiah remained asleep. A second phrase followed, quiet and worn smooth by repetition. "Watch my 6. Ghost." Rose at once. He stepped behind the bed, turned toward the doorway, and sat with his back to Isaiah, exactly where he had sat 1,000 times before. The movement made no sound, but Isaiah's eyes opened. He looked at the white shape guarding the room from behind his shoulder, and the wall he had built against hope began to crack. Isaiah did not speak at first. He watched Ghost hold the old position behind the bed, body still, ears forward, attention fixed on the doorway. It was a simple posture, but it belonged to another life. A dusty room overseas. A narrow passage beneath failing lights. Long nights when sleep came only because a white shepherd had agreed to remain awake. Isaiah slowly pushed himself higher against the pillows. The movement pulled at every tired muscle, yet he barely noticed. "Ghost," he said again. This time he was fully awake. The dog turned his head, but did not leave his post. Isaiah swallowed. "Front." Ghost rose, walked around the bed, and stopped at Isaiah's left side. Not the right. Never the right. Isaiah had trained him there because an old shoulder injury made the other side difficult during long patrols. The detail was too small for a report and too personal for coincidence. Isaiah stared at the folded tip of the dog's left ear. His hand lifted, then stopped halfway. Hope had become something dangerous during the past 3 years. It had led him through phone calls that ended in apologies, visits to facilities where every white dog became a disappointment, and nights when he dreamed of paws outside his door only to wake to an empty hallway. Ghost waited. He did not demand the touch. He simply stood close enough to receive it. Isaiah's fingers finally reached the fur beneath the damaged ear. The shepherd closed his eyes. A breath left Isaiah that sounded like surrender. "You always hated anyone touching this spot," he whispered. Ghost leaned into his palm. The monitor beside the bed continued its quiet rhythm. Isaiah traced the faint scar across the bridge of the dog's nose, then found a small ridge beneath the thick fur near his collar. He remembered the day Ghost had earned it, not through violence, but by forcing his way beneath. A collapsed wooden gate to reach a trapped training partner. He remembered washing dust from the wound with bottled water while Ghost sat perfectly still and refused to look away from him. "It is you," Isaiah said. The words were barely louder than breath. Ghost placed his right paw against the edge of the mattress. Once. He waited. Twice. Then a third time. Tap. 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 Isaiah's face broke open. He covered his eyes with one hand, but the tears came through anyway. They were not loud. There was no dramatic cry, no collapse beneath the weight of the moment. Only a Marine who had learned to carry loss with discipline finally allowing himself to set it down. Ghost lifted his front paws onto the side of the bed, careful of the medical lines, and brought his face close. Isaiah lowered his hand and pressed his forehead gently against the dog's. White fur met dark skin beneath the soft blue light of the room. For several seconds, neither moved. The years between them seemed to narrow into one shared breath. "I am sorry," Isaiah whispered. Ghost's ears shifted toward him. "I am sorry I stopped looking." The dog answered by resting his muzzle against Isaiah's shoulder. There was no accusation in the gesture, no memory of being forgotten. Dogs do not measure love by the days that failed. They measure it by the moment a familiar hand returns. Outside the room, Evelyn had paused near the glass. Mason stood beside her, with Daniel and Major Whitaker several steps behind. None of them entered. Some reunions were too sacred for witnesses, even when witnesses happened to be standing nearby. Whitaker lowered his eyes. The folder in his hand no longer looked official. It looked small. Inside the room, Isaiah reached toward the sealed pouch on the bedside table. His fingers were still weak, so Ghost watched as he carefully removed the broken piece of metal. The half-tag caught a thread of moonlight from the window. Isaiah held it beside the worn plate beneath Ghost's collar. The edges matched. Not perfectly, because time had bent one corner and weather had softened the other, but enough. A promise divided by error had found its missing half. Ghost smelled the tag, then looked back at Isaiah. I kept mine, Isaiah said. Looks like you kept yours too. The shepherd's tail moved once against the floor. It was the first full sign of relief anyone had seen from him since the warehouse. Isaiah managed a tired smile. You crossed 18 miles for me. Ghost tilted his head, and I could not cross 3 years. The regret returned, but only for a moment. Isaiah looked into the amber eyes before him and understood something no report could teach. Ghost had not come to collect an apology. He had come because the bond had never ended. Isaiah moved his hand to the dog's chest and felt the steady beat beneath the white fur. Watch my 6, he said softly. Ghost stepped down, circled behind the bed, and resumed his post. This time Isaiah smiled as he closed his eyes. The room was still. The storm was gone. And for the first time in 3 years, both of them rested knowing the other was near. Isaiah remained at the medical center for 6 more days. Each morning, sunlight reached the foot of his bed a little earlier, and each morning Ghost was already awake before it touched the floor. The white shepherd followed every nurse with quiet attention, learned the rhythm of the hallway, and waited beside the door whenever Isaiah stood for physical therapy. Recovery came slowly. A few steps with assistance became 10. 10 became a careful walk to the window. Ghost matched him at the left side without crowding, moving at the pace of a man rebuilding trust in his own strength. Major Whitaker returned on the 3rd day carrying a corrected service record and a new identification plate for Ghost. He placed both on the bedside table, but did not ask Isaiah to sign anything. The old file has been reopened, he said. Every transfer has been reviewed. His name is connected to yours again. Isaiah looked at the polished plate, then at the worn one beneath Ghost's collar. Keep the new one in the record, he said. He earned every mark on the old one. Whitaker nodded. Before leaving, he paused near the doorway. I cannot give you back the time. Isaiah rested one hand on Ghost's shoulders. No, but you can make sure this does not happen to another team. Whitaker promised he would. It was not forgiveness spoken aloud, but it was a place where forgiveness could begin. On the 6th morning, Evelyn removed the final monitor. Mason and Daniel arrived with clean clothes, a folded jacket, and a small paper bag containing a breakfast sandwich Ghost had been smelling from halfway down the hall. Daniel tried to hide it behind his back. Ghost sat in front of him and stared patiently until everyone laughed. The sound filled the room gently, without disturbing what had happened there. Isaiah dressed slowly. His body still carried the weakness of cold and exhaustion, but his posture had changed. He stood straighter when Ghost moved beside him. At the entrance, a nurse handed Isaiah the sealed pouch containing the broken tag. He opened it and held the metal in his palm. For years, the half-piece had represented the end of a story. Now it felt like proof that an ending could be mistaken. Outside, the North Carolina air was clear and cool. The storm had washed the sky clean, leaving the pine trees bright beneath the morning sun. Water still filled the ditches along the road, and pieces of branches rested near the curbs, but the base had begun to move again. Trucks rolled through the gates. Flags lifted in the light breeze. Marines crossed the sidewalks carrying coffee and paperwork, unaware that a small miracle was walking past them without ceremony. Ghost stepped into the sunlight and stopped. He raised his nose, testing the air, then looked back at Isaiah. Isaiah smiled. I am coming. They walked together toward Mason's vehicle. No crowd waited. No camera recorded the moment. That suited them both. Some victories needed witnesses. Others needed only the 2 souls who had survived them. Before getting into the truck, Isaiah asked Mason to take him back to the temporary recovery station. The warehouse was nearly empty when they arrived. Portable lights had been removed, and the generator no longer shook the walls. The concrete floor had dried. Only a faint line of mud remained near the loading doors where Ghost had stood over the sealed bag. Isaiah walked to the spot and stopped. Ghost stood beside him, silent. For a long moment, Isaiah looked at the floor. They thought you were guarding the dead, Mason said from several feet away. Isaiah lowered his hand into Ghost's white fur. He was guarding the part of me that had not given up yet. He took a blank evidence tag from the supply table and wrote a sentence across the back. A dog knew I was alive before the world checked twice. He folded it once and placed it beside the broken piece of his old tag inside his jacket pocket. Then he turned toward the open doors. Sunlight spread across the warehouse, reaching the place where darkness had held them only days before. Ghost moved to Isaiah's left side. Together, they stepped outside. Months later, Isaiah returned to limited duty and began working with search and rescue teams along the coast. Ghost was officially retired, but retirement meant little to a dog who still woke before dawn and waited beside the front door. They lived in a small house near the pine woods, where the air carried salt from the Atlantic and the porch faced east. Some mornings Isaiah sat there with coffee while Ghost rested at his boots. Neither needed to fill the silence. The missing years remained. Nothing could erase them. Yet the years ahead no longer felt empty. On quiet evenings, Isaiah would touch the broken tag beneath his shirt, and Ghost would lift his head as if hearing an old command. Then Isaiah would whisper, "Watch my 6." Ghost would move behind his chair and face the darkening yard, faithful as ever. Some promises survive distance. Some survive time. And some wait beside a final breath, refusing to believe that love has reached the end.